Welcome to this week's roundtable discussion. If you are a regular here, you will know that every Tuesday at 4 p.m, we dissect a headline-grabbing news story and bring you the key voices on the topic who are living and breathing the subject. So far, we've dug into the dirty business of the UK's sewage problem, analysed the creation of a Chilean marine protected area, discussed the damning implication of forever chemicals on our marine ecosystems and our own health, and tracked the fallout from the tragic story of Timmy the whale. But this week, we are turning our attention to a more positive news story. At the end of last month, the entire 130-mile cross-border catchment of the River Wye was formally recognised as a living ecosystem with intrinsic rights in a historic charter adopted by local authorities, including Powys and Hereford County Councils. This groundbreaking charter outlines fundamental rights for the waterway, including the right to flow, the right to biodiversity, the right to be free from pollution, and the right to be legally represented. Campaigners and local community members have celebrated the milestone, but the Charter also stands against the backdrop of a grim reality. Over the past decade, the Wye has suffered a near-total ecological collapse, with runoff from the rapid expansion of industrial chicken farming, combined with failing water infrastructure, raw sewage spills, has choked the river with toxic algal blooms. And this thick, suffocating sludge starves the water of oxygen and devastates the biodiversity within. The Wye is currently at the centre of the largest environmental pollution claim in UK High Court history, with 4,500 local citizens suing major corporations like Avara Foods and Welsh Water. And as it stands, the River Wye's rights in this charter are not yet legally binding, and under the UK's current law, nature is still legally classified as property, not as person. But the rights of nature movement is undeniably gathering momentum worldwide, with rivers in Ecuador, Canada, and New Zealand having been granted legal personhood in recent years. And in the UK, the House of Lords is now considering a proposal by the former leader of the Green Party, Natalie Bennett, to change nature's legal status from objects and property and resources to subjects with their own inherent rights. So this story of river rights in the Wye also begs some wider questions. What do river rights practically mean for a local community? Where does this legal philosophy originate from? How effective are they at protecting waterways? And what can we learn from legal precedents set in rivers like in Canada, Ecuador, and New Zealand? Thankfully, we have not just me, but 3 fantastic panelists to examine and explore these questions a little bit further. First, we have Eamon Bork. Eamon is an active citizen scientist, filmmaker, and co-founder of grassroots citizen science project Friends of the Wye. He helped to spearhead the iconic 2021 Walking with the Wye pilgrimage and organises citizen science projects to help inform efforts to save the Wye. In turn, this has galvanised amazing community support for the river. Eamon, welcome to the roundtable.
Hello, yeah, great to be here.
Great to have you. We are also joined by Lucy Ward, Ocean Programme Lead at the Earth Law Centre. She trained as a marine biologist and began her career working on habitat restoration solutions and leading legal research teams. At the moment, Lucy leads the Ocean Programme at ELC, where she works to forward ecocentric legal innovations for marine species and ecosystems, ensuring their voices are heard and their inherent rights are recognised in our legal system. Thanks for joining us, Lucy.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Jenny Vega Cardenas, President of the International Observatory on Nature Rights. Jenny is a world-renowned legal scholar who has shaped environmental democracy at international climate summits from COP16 to COP29. She has spearheaded the historic effort that granted the Magpie River, or in the Inuit language, my pronunciation might not be amazing here, Mutshekau-Shipu rights. This was the first Canadian river to be granted legal rights, and she then went on to be a key force in the legal push for granting personhood to Canada's St. Lawrence River. She has written on and advocated for the foundational role that Indigenous voices and ancestral codes play in the Rights for Nature movement. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to dig further into this story and what it means more broadly. And as always, if you're in the audience and you have any questions for any of our panelists, please leave them on the chat bar on the right. But first, since we are starting with the River Wye and we have a River Wye expert with us, Eamon, can you tell us a bit about the state of the river and why the charter was necessary in the first place?
Yeah, so maybe it's some of the background of Friends of the River Wye. We kind of formed 5-6 years ago when there was a massive algal bloom on the river. So we're a group of local people who came together, basically provoked by that event. So a huge kind of algal bloom took place from the headwaters all the way down, unprecedented in scale. And we came together as a local group of kind of concerned citizens, mostly people who are witnessing this unfolding in front of them. To sort of do a little bit of research about what was happening and why it was happening. And so it was actually during COVID that all of this happened. So for the largest time at the beginning, we were just a group of people who met on Zoom, went away, did bits of research and came back and looked at the problems the river was facing. And the big thing that research sort of revealed to us is that there was a total lack of information actually about what was going wrong with the river. And that was largely because the Environment Agency and NRW in Wales had all their funding stripped over the kind of 10-year period and weren't able to provide proper data to understand what was going on with the river. So we formed these local groups really to fill that space. We thought, well, what we need to do first of all is have a citizen science kind of network of people who will test water quality throughout the catchment. And we spent 2 or 3 years developing that with Cardiff University and others. And we now have an incredible network of citizen scientists, over 250 in our grand network. Friends of the River Wye have 116 active citizen scientists, but we have over 250 in a wider network with CPRE and others. And so we have this amazing data set that tells us all about water quality and all about the problems that the Wye is facing. And it's a myriad of problems, really, that we realise. There's a massive nutrient problem with the catchment from runoff, from farms and agriculture. Industrial agriculture is a really big problem for the Wye River. There's been a huge proliferation of intensive poultry units in the region. We also have the issues that all of the other kind of rivers in the UK are facing with sewage pollution. For the Wye in particular, though, agriculture is almost 70% of the problem. It's a very rural river. So although we do have sewage pollution, there's a real focus on runoff and land use and agricultural issues for the Wye. And then feeding into that, we have the climate. So we had just recently, in the last couple of weeks, we had record temperatures throughout the Wye catchment that our citizen scientists fed back to us. So it's like a perfect storm of kind of pollution problems for the river. And at the same time, though, there's a massive mobilization of support and love behind trying to protect it. And I think the River Rights Charter that happened on the 24th of May in Hay-on-Wye was a kind of culmination of many, many years of grassroots activism and different groups collaborating and working together to try and push back against all of these issues, to ask for more protection for the river, really, and a change in kind of status, in the way we look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so if we come to you, Lucy, and when we talk about giving a river rights and giving nature rights, what does that mean? What is that movement more broadly?
I mean, first of all, I'll maybe just correct slightly from giving a river rights to recognizing its inherent rights and value. So inherently there's that shift, and that I think that kind of culminizes it perfectly, where we're looking for this fundamental shift from a resource to relationship. So it's how are we moving away from how we've traditionally engaged with natural entities, whether that be a river, whether that be the ocean, whether that be a certain species in your area. How do we build better relationality with the natural world around us? And how do we move away from just valuing nature as a resource and something for us to use, and kind of an infinite one at that? How do we move further towards these resources aren't infinite, but also then it's not just resources. These rivers and the species that they support and the ecosystems that they create are, beings with inherent value and inherent rights that we need to recognize in our legal systems, in our financial systems. And the way that we make those changes, there's obviously some steps that you take, and rights-based legal approaches is definitely one of those. But a lot of that work is underpinned by this community level work that's just about how do we build better relationship and how do we raise awareness for that concept.
Mm-hmm. And then coming to you, Jenny, I know you have worked with the Magpie River, which you included Indigenous voices, and they were the main actors. Can you speak a bit about this? Philosophy isn't new, is it? So how do Indigenous voices play out in this legal framework?
Yeah, in fact, we at the International Observatory on Nature's Rights, based in Canada, we started a campaign concerning the St. Lawrence River. That is a huge and beautiful and iconic river here in Canada. But then we started the project, but we were contacted by the Innu Nation, who wanted to protect their holy river, the river that is sacred for them. They consider the river as a sister, as an ancestor that has sustained the Innu community for many years. And they also wanted to recognize the legal personhood as the Maori did in New Zealand. So we were like very happy to start with them the process, to do workshop, to compare cases between Colombia that also recognized the Atrato River as a legal person, the New Zealand case and Ecuador cases also, to take into account what is in the stake and what could be done at the municipal and indigenous nation level. So they were very surprised to see that here in Canada we have not only two levels of government but three. So we have common law, civil law, and also indigenous legal orders that give them the power to protect their land, their territories. So that's why they could pass a resolution granting and recognizing a legal personhood for the river and 9 rights. But also it was in a mirror resolution with the regional county municipality that gathers 10 municipalities. So they have also the power to protect the territory, because in Canada we have the principle recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada, that is the subsidiarity principle. There is a principle that exists at international level in sustainable development principles and goals. That is that the best decision should be taken at the closest level to the citizens, because they know better what is the impact of having a polluted river, as our colleague has presented. So it has been a beautiful experience with beautiful outcomes, and they are very proud to have taken this huge step to protect the river and their territory.
It's really nice to hear, and it was a really exciting story to read about when I saw it. Eamon, I saw you nodding there when she was talking about community actors being important to being at the centre of these sort of cases. Can you talk a bit about how the community has received the charter and how important the community was in bringing it about?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the space that we work in. It is a community group that we run, and everyone here is a volunteer. All of our citizen scientists are volunteers, and all the people who came forward to kind of create the ceremony on Sunday were local volunteers. There were choirs there, storytellers, there were musicians, there were these representatives from the local councils. But it's really interesting talking about the framing of the way we look at the river as a completely different entity. We're definitely leaning into those other rivers around the world that have had this sort of personhood and this different status chosen. We don't think the Wye is any different. We don't think that the people here connect to their river any differently than those communities in other parts of the world. We think that kinship with the river is real. And I think that's what the event kind of brought out really well down at the Warren, is that people consider this river something much more than a resource. And actually one of the issues we have in Wales is that the body that looks after it is called Natural Resources Wales, which is a really bad name for something that's protecting a river that people think is sacred and beautiful and beloved. So there's a sense that it's being reframed, and it's being reframed by the people who live alongside it. I also nodded at one point about, there's a question in there that someone's put in the chat about who will actually speak on behalf of the river. And we've had this amazing thing happen in our rights of the river kind of movement here in the Wye Valley, which is that someone's been appointed as the voice of the River Wye 2 years ago to sit on the council and the nutrient management board to speak for the river on her behalf. And that's a kind of incredible sort of foreshadowing of this greater rights movement charter, was we actually had someone whose role it was to speak on behalf of the river with no fear and no favour. So not thinking of all the human interests, whether they be canoeing or farming or fishing, but to sort of imagine into this idea of a river being a living thing and how would it express itself. So some of these ideas they seem quite far out, but they fit, and nobody seems to question them. Everyone thinks this river needs more representation. It's more than a resource, it's an entity. And so by having this new kind of voice of the river, we've actually got a very powerful tool there for the river to express itself.
Yeah, and if we come to you, Lucy, on that, How typical is it? Is it quite common within these sort of like rights for nature movements, or I don't know what quite the word is, but within these legal kind of established frameworks, is it typical for someone to be like a voice of the river? How does it play out on the legal side?
Yeah, I mean, it's looked different in different cases. And I think jurisdictionally, it changes a lot, and in different countries based on that legal system, based on the kind of entity that you're protecting, and also really, you know, who's led that campaign, and what support there is to make sure that, you know, nature's voice is heard and represented well. It's definitely something that's happening. You know, it's happening in a lot of different forms. For example, we have written a toolkit on rights and a voice for coral reef species and ecosystems at the Earth Law Centre's Ocean Programme. And within that toolkit, we have a whole framework for how guardianship councils can be established in this legislation to allow local community actors who are already living in relationship with the reef to speak on its behalf and for and with as a part of this entity, you know, in the legal system. And that's been made so it's very adaptable across jurisdictions. In a slightly different but very similarly linked example to the Wye example, at the Earth Law Centre, we also do a lot of work in nature conscious governance with businesses and organisations. So looking at what these frameworks and principles look like in a corporate space too, because really all of this is about how do we do better governance to make sure that nature's voice is represented. So applying these rights of nature legal frameworks into corporate law as well. And in those instances, we've created board seats for nature, where then human proxies will be trained to sit on that board and speak for, with, and as a part of nature in a very similar way, but in a slightly different decision-making forum. And those similar principles I know have also fed into some of these kind of guardianship roles in like the spaces where there's kind of council level governance happening for rivers as well. So all of these different activities feed into each other, and the more we learn in one governance space, the more it can be applied in different governance spaces, and the more we test it for different types of ecosystems at different levels of governance, different places jurisdictionally, the more we can curate those learnings and really feed back in what does it actually mean and look like to speak for, with, and as a part of nature, and how do we as human proxies do a better job of that going forward, and how do we like co-learn together, because no one person is the kind of sole full voice for this. And I think everyone who's in these roles knows and understands that, and it's all about like collective learning and growing in practice.
That's really nice to hear that kind of collaborative sense across the sector. And it does feel like in the last year or 2 years that the idea of the rights of nature is kind of like burgeoning and growing. I wondered if, Jenny, you could speak to your experience of whether you feel there's momentum in this space.
Yeah, of course. In fact, last year we collaborated with another Indigenous nations in Ontario, Canada too, and they have also the new legal personhood recognized for a lake, Rice Lake, that was presented in the COP30. So the COP30, last year, we asked many people to do something for climate, something for the planet. So at that moment, we understood that each level of governments can also do something, and also each of us as citizens. So we collaborate, we contribute with this new initiative, and now I think it's important to do the link between climate change and protection of water and rivers and lakes, because as you know, the 80% of consequence of climate change is you can see it on water. So drought or floods or many things, or concentration of pollutants and many things. So 80% of what are the consequences are on water. So that's why I think river rights and lakes rights of protecting river resource, water resources, or sources, not resources, but sources of water, I think is very, very a key point. And mostly this year that we said that we are living in a bankrupt of water issues. So we have many water, yes, but very polluted. So in practical and a practical scale, we are drinking polluted water and we are affecting ourselves. So changing the shift and protecting the whole watershed, and also the way we do agriculture, industry, how we manage wastewater treatment, etc. It impacted the whole ecosystem, but also us as part of the ecosystem. So I think last year was important for Mutirao, that was each person and each level of government can do something, but this year going to be the water bankruptcy. So we need to do more for water. So I think the initiative you have right now with that Imon presented is important also to give it a voice in an international level. This year at the end of December, it's going to be the World Water Conference. So I think these voices should be canalized there to impact and give hope for many people. Because when you see a river that is polluted, you seem hopeless because it's huge. But then when you unite one person to the other and do some local action, then national actions, and then international one, you're going to have more and huge impact. So I think this is the year for water, and this is a year where we can do more.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love it for it to be the year for water. It'd be great. And I do also agree with that kind of momentum building sentiment. I guess someone who was skeptical about the charter in the River Wye might say that it's not legally binding. And there has been legislation in place before that has failed to stop pollution. So coming to you, Eamon, what do you think is important about this charter that will be able to affect change or stir that hope that Jenny was talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting. And that's a point that was made on the day and that we've made consistently since, actually, that this isn't a law. It isn't a new law. And one of the problems we have with the Wye is that there's a lot of existing laws that are failing to protect the river. So we don't want to add another law that no one uses at this point. We're really looking for a complete shift in thinking, or systems change, really, something a lot grander. And you couldn't help but feel that what happened, the theatre of it and all the music and the sort of storytelling actually sort of pointed towards more of a cultural shift. And there was an interesting story straight afterwards, in that one of the kind of hot topics on the Wye is periodically a farmer will come in and change the course of a river or stream. And we've had some famous cases regionally where a whole section of the lug was dug up, trees were ripped out, and the bank was redressed by a farmer, and it became a real hot potato of an issue locally. And so what we've got here is a new way of looking at the kind of river as something that people need to respect completely differently. You can't have these kind of incidents where people I've sort of lost my train of thought slightly, but it's I think the emphasis on the day was this, that it's changing the way people see the river. It's not changing the law, like I was saying. That the existing laws are being ignored. And that's right. Sorry, I caught my train. There was a really interesting kind of statement by the council in Herefordshire after a second stream was discovered to have been straightened by a farmer just north of Herefordshire. And the council came out and used language that is kind of apparent in the charter. So this idea of the river having a right to flow freely without extraction and without diversion. And we felt that this is an instant kind of reaction to the charter having some effect in the real world, that once you establish what the rights are for the river, having representation, a right to biodiversity, a right to regenerate, all these things, once they're in the consciousness of people, they can have an effect. And I suppose that's the main point of the charter. Not that it's a law, but it's something that will seed itself in the consciousness of people generally, and people with influence as well, I think. So councils, national park authorities, farmers, people like that will think, okay, it isn't straightforward just straightening a river and kind of diverting it or extracting water. The river itself has the right to be respected. And that's the main difference that we're hoping will be engendered by this sort of act, is that people see it slightly differently.
Yeah, if I can jump in, it's just something to say, changing the law by the narratives.
Oh yeah. Will you expand a bit upon that? What do you sort of mean by that?
Yeah, because when you tell a story about the river coming to our mind in a different perspective. So now there's a story to be told, a story to be shared, and to be so in the imaginary of people who are living around the river, they will see the river differently, and they will come there to visit. As here into for the magpie was that the case. Now it's a story to be told. We receive Robert McFarlane here, a special, a very good writer
Oh,
coming
wow.
from UK, and he wrote the book, beautiful book, is A River Alive. He's telling the story of the magpie. And so he did a very long travel to go to the Magpie River, to visit the community, to understand why they protected the river, to navigate the river. So it's changing the minds of everyone. And many filmmakers came also just to visit the Magpie. And the communities also who did that beautiful step. So it's changing the law, it's changing the narratives, the imaginary. And so now here the government said, no, I won't go with a project of a dam. I understand that the community, they don't want it, and I respect it. But the impact was huge. It's not only because they stop in the dam, because it's changing the way we see the magpie, and many people are getting inspired of that case and giving hope in this time that we really need it.
I'll add there too. I think that like within that as well, you know, these like kind of, I think art and culture, you know, they often precede law, and it's hard for actors like, you know, local lawmakers and corporations to get on board with this kind of stuff unless it's seen as socially and culturally acceptable. And art is often the very first step of that, and then culture shifts, and then law follows after. I think obviously it can be the other way, where a law is made and it kind of cracks down and then everyone has to change around it. But often it's more effective into the long term, I think, when art and culture has preceded it and we've already done that groundwork to making people want to adhere to it, because otherwise you're just chasing people around with a stick, right? And you're like, you have to listen to this law and we're going to fine you. And actually that's not a good way to create public change, because it just is, you know, bad energy feeding into bad energy. It's how do you actually create a scenario where people want to do that, and then you solidify that and give people the tools to solidify it through law. And so I think that's why these like artistic and cultural pieces are so important to preceding law. So I think with this case, like not a non-legally binding charter that has a lot of community support and is that step to getting actors on board to actually making change can often be more effective than having law. And it's not to say that that can't be made legally binding down the line as well, and having community support makes that a whole lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely. Can I just get in there? I think that's absolutely right. And actually, interesting enough, when we started Friends of the River Wye and we started doing river sampling, science river sampling, we also wanted to test the river for arts and culture and creative river sampling. So we got people to submit their poetry and their art and craft and their thoughts and their memories of the river, and sort of almost mine this other cultural phenomenon, which is like how people cherish the river, and they use it. People rely on it for their well-being, for their mental health, for their creativity. And so we always have these dual strands to the science and the arts. And I think that that's what you could see at the event as well, is that it had a sort of rigorous political side to it. People were signing up and committing themselves to having representing the river within their organizations, but also they were demonstrably showing that they loved the river. All the councillors brought with them sort of bits of greenery from their own gardens, little sort of treasured kind of riverside elements and sort of tokens that they brought with them as an offering. So there was this whole sort of symbolic side about sort of cherishing. And yeah, and I just wanted to back up what Lucy said, is that this kind of stuff has to come first. Almost the grassroots swelling up of opinion and a showing of kind of passion needs to come before laws and things change or follow with it.
Yeah, I think yes. So Jenny's got to go. She's very busy. So off to another meeting. But thank you so much for joining us and for bringing all your insight. That has been really, really interesting in the discussion.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to continue connecting with you all. Have a great conversation.
Thanks, Jenny. Thank you.
A GoFundMe for the St. Lawrence River Alliance is just there on the screen if anyone wants to check it out and have a look at it and donate any money.
Bye.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, great. So if we take that as a moment to look at some of our questions we've got coming in, we've got someone from Kerala in India, where most of their rivers are drying up, being exploited due to illegal sand mining. Do you think giving a voice will be effective in this situation? I don't know the ins and outs or whether there's different legal precedents in different places, but maybe we can go to you, Lucy. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I'll give you a little disclaimer. I'm not actually a lawyer. I'm a law and policy expert, and I work in rights of nature, but not legally trained. So just to throw that one in there before I start answering legal questions for everyone. I think, well, I mean, so this is a UK example of what rights of nature and rights of rivers specifically has looked like, but this movement definitely didn't start in the UK, and its biggest wins are also not in the UK, especially kind of like technically and legally. You know, as has been mentioned historically, a lot of work has happened in places like New Zealand and in places like South America on the Atrato and on the Wanganui River, where there's been this, you know, really strong push from local and Indigenous communities to protect the river and to uphold its inherent rights and value. And there are cases in India as well of kind of rights-based approaches being taken. I think the challenge oftentimes is governance and how these laws are designed to make sure that it can be implemented properly in governance situations. And oftentimes that just involves a lot of being creative, being opportunistic, but also having institutional support from the right actors as well. So it is very case dependent, but I think that wherever the voice of a river is being included in a place where decisions are being made and it hasn't historically been included, we're always going to shift the needle a bit. How far and how quickly often depends on the situational context. But if that's something that you would like to explore in more detail, we'd love to help out. We work all over the globe.
Little plug there for Earth Law. And then I guess let's just lead straight on to this next question. How are these laws kind of implemented how are they different to laws which already try and govern the health of the river and sort of protect the health of the river? And it's kind of interpreting that question there rather than duplicating. So how do they not duplicate those laws that already exist?
Yeah, well, so one of the things that we're kind of, advocating for actually, and one of the problems we have with the Wye is that the laws that are already there are not being enforced. So we've just released a video a couple of weeks ago about the Environment Agency that have the capacity to fine where there's poor practice farming and where there's runoff and pollution, but they don't use it. There's hardly any cases of them using the existing laws they already have. So we have this, I said it before really, but we have this problem where we don't want to create another set of laws. What we want to do is make people use the ones they already have, I think. And that's a big push that we're doing at the moment, is to say the only people who can actually enforce the law in Wales and England at the moment are NRW and the Environment Agency, and they're not doing that properly. They're not doing it with sewage spills, and they're not doing it with environmental pollution as well. So I think the charter features there was a kind of something symbolic about people, representatives of the councils coming forward on camera in a very formal setting and signing a piece of paper. You can be held to that. You know, we're going to use it as campaigners to say, look, you were there, you've made these pledges and these promises. Now we want to see action. And I think that's also part of the sort of campaign trajectory for the Wye, is that we've had years of data gathering, all being done by local people, by the way. Which is my answer to the Kerala question as well, was like one of the other voices for the river is local community groups. And beyond the sort of symbolic sort of rights of nature bit, one of the voices is just the voices of local people who live along it. So if you can organise well and do what we've done on the Wye, that could also help a campaign in anywhere in Kerala and things. But yeah, I think it's time for a shift in the campaign from the sort of data sets and the campaigning and the highlighting of the problems to action. And that's what this nature kind of we have to pivot into action now. The government has to come behind this clear will that there is from the local population for change. There has to be some sort of like funding, and there has to be properly funded environmental agencies and proper fines for pollution and proper infrastructure change to make the difference, really. So, yeah.
And one thing I can add to that too, and I mean, maybe this isn't quite so UK specific, but I think in terms of like rights of nature laws in generally, a lot of this is about, you know, humans have rights, corporations have legal rights, and largely corporations have legal rights so they can have standing to bring cases in court against actors that would do damage to them. And so why are we not applying the same principles to natural entities, you know? And I think that's more than anything, I think that's a great translation point for like bringing to light how much we rely on these entities, you know, how much our waters, our rivers, our oceans regulate our climate, provide us with sources of food, provide us with sources of joy, all of these things they provide for us, in addition to just having inherent rights and value and the inherent right to exist and thrive and flourish. And we are not the masters of all. We shouldn't be just removing things from the planet in the way that they were supposed to exist, which I think many cultures across the world understand already and have for many generations, and we've really lost touch with that in our kind of modern, quite capitalist driven society. I think the inherent goal of these laws is to not duplicate what's already in existence, but give natural entities a place to kind of have standing and bring their, in legal terms, bring their value up to par with everything else.
And then on that, how successful has it been in court, these rights of natures, in stopping big polluters and in making and in defending the rights of the rivers? How successful has that been?
UK specific or in general?
Let's go in general.
In general, it's always a mixed bag. You know, this is when we say rights of nature and ecocentric law, it's a movement, and it's been going on for a very long time, and it's been going on, you know, it's all, the root of all of this is inspired by indigenous cosmologies and things that people have been fighting for a really, really, really long time. A great example is Ecuador, because the constitutional rights for nature were given to Ecuador in 2008. So that's one of the most mature kind of rights of nature cases in the way that it's the movement has progressed. And, you know, that's definitely not been a linear journey. There's been massive successes in implementing in court, and there's been massive losses. And, you know, as different governments have come in and out, there's also been huge pressures on these constitutional rights of natures and efforts to have them taken away as well. But indigenous groups in Ecuador have really fought for those rights to be upheld, continue to be upheld, and to be for them to remain in the constitution too, even in the face of quite right-wing government pressure as well. So it's always going to be a bit of up and down. There's always going to be a bit of forward and backward, but generally the movement has progressed so far and so quickly, and especially in the last kind of 5 years has really taken off in a way that is completely unprecedented, and we're just seeing more and more useful applications for it. And as I say, the more we test it out in different jurisdictions, in different contexts, for different ecosystems, the more we prove the value and the necessity of these laws in practice too, the more we work towards creating proper legal shifts. And the real goal is for rights of nature not to be a kind of fringe niche environmental movement, but for it to be just a part of every country's law, and for it to be a kind of internationally accepted thing, that this should be something that happens in our legal system. So we inch ever closer towards that, but it's definitely not linear.
Yeah, and kind of on that, Jenny spoke of sort of the climate crisis accelerating the move towards the rights of nature becoming more mainstream and more kind of gathering this momentum. What's your thoughts on why it's kind of grown so quickly in the last year or 5 years?
I think one of the factors is that it's like what we're facing. The threats that the river are facing are from massive entities. So in the Wye catchment, we've got Avara Cargill opening huge poultry units spread across the region. Enormous intensive poultry units have appeared since 2010. Hundreds of these that have had to again be mapped. The numbers of chickens and the numbers of units have had to be mapped by local people. The data has not been made available by the EA or the NRW. So it's another community effort to map where these kind of massive poultry units are, and the quantities of manure coming out of these places are being spread on the catchment. So one of the reasons that you've got a rights for nature kind of movement in the Wye Valley is because the rights for nature are being ignored. The river is being sullied, it's being destroyed. So the reason it's so vigorous here, the campaigning and stuff, is because the damage of the river is so real. And I think that's that's the thing is, and also we've had for years this sense of the river being at a very critical tipping point. So, you know, Natural England downgraded it to unfavourable declining 2 years ago, the condition of the Wye. The next sort of grade below that is destroyed. So that kind of gives you the impetus that's behind all of the stuff that we're doing, really. It's that the rights of nature are being ignored. They're being ignored by people, by entities that have an awful track record of destroying the planet. So we already see in Argentina and Brazil the destruction of forests and rivers there to grow soya. That soya is then shipped into the catchment here to feed millions of chickens. So if we don't organize, and if we don't come behind these ideas of elevating, it's what Lucy said really, is that we're just trying to get the rights of nature up to our own sort of level, but in fact they should be much higher than us, because we all come from this kind of place. We all come out of the water originally, we all come from nature originally, but we're just trying to get an incremental increase in the rights of nature to kind of compete with these entities that don't care about it. They clearly don't care about the river health, and so it's up to local people to step into that space.
I see you nodding along there, Lucy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. I think that, like, in terms of the increase of the movement, I think like connectivity and storytelling and sharing these stories is a huge factor in that. In 2017 with the Wanganui case, that was a huge kind of galvanizing point, and things really started to speed up kind of from that moment too. So I think that where there are these big wins like you guys had in Hay on Wye, and I think where these places where we've made big jumps, being able to communicate that in a way that's accessible to people in a broad sense and that brings people into the movement is a huge thing for speeding it up and showing where we have successes and showing what it really looks like in practice, to really be able to stand up against naysayers who say, oh, I don't understand what this is, I don't understand how it's applied, and having that kind of like fear and scarcity mindset come in. The best way to stand up to that and push it forward is to show the successes, to talk about it in practice and get more people to join into it, because it's something that no one organization or one entity or one jurisdiction can do. It has to be all of us together to do that. And I think that's it's the same. I echo also what you've said, Eamon, in that this like kind of consistent rise that we see with the cost of living crisis, with like rampant consumerism and capitalism driving the climate crisis, like all of these problems that we see in these systems. People are hungry for systemic change, and people want a different way of doing things. And examples like the rights of nature movement, where we can show what it really looks like in practice to not only envision a better world, but see a system that would underpin that and have ways to like actually really act on it, is really galvanizing. And we see that again and again. At ELC, where a lot of our work is supported by interns and volunteers, the best and the brightest from law schools all across the world come and do the summer course and just want to have a career in like rights of nature and be a rights of nature lawyer, because it's a better way of existing in the planet. So I think those kind of, that part of it is there too.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely second that. I think one of the things we spoke about just before we came on was this idea of how this has really struck a chord. And I think one of the reasons is it's defiantly hopeful as well at the moment. So there's so much doom and gloom and so many awful things happening all around us. But this particular event was kind of future focused. It was like, we can shift things, like we've got this great community action. We've got people who really care about it. Paul Powson was there, and he talks about like falling in love with your river and treating it more like, and that's something that you adore like a relative. And when you have that sort of connection with a river, the people who you're up against know it, that no one's going to back down in this movement when they see the sort of the emphasis of how much people care as well. So I think there was something that really struck a chord. We've never had as many likes on a video before that we've put out there. We've never had as many other river groups contact us for information about how we've got to this point. So there's a real sort of sense that we're connecting with the kind of global community of river activists and people who want to make this sort of change happen.
Well, that is a lovely broad message of hope that I think I'm very conscious of your time and the time of people attending to bring this kind of discussion to a close. But thank you so much for both your insights and that discussion. I think I learned a lot about river rights and rights of nature more broadly. And it's been fantastic having you both on. So yeah, thank you very much for joining, and thank you for everyone watching.